Well, welcome and good evening. My name is Keith Horton. I'm Pro Vice Chancellor and Dean of the Faculty of Business Law and Social Sciences. So a very warm welcome to the Hive here in Birmingham City University, one of our newer spaces, which is a fantastic space, particularly for the sort of event that we have for you this evening. It's a real privilege actually to welcome Professor Hugh Koch to join us this evening for his inaugural professorial talk. And also his daughter Emily as well. Emily, congratulations. Your book is Book of the Week at the moment, is it, at Waterstones? If I Die Before I Wake. A fantastic read, I understand, as well, so look out for Emily's book at Waterstones at the moment as well. But delighted you could both join us here this evening, Hugh and Emily. And I know the session tonight is going to be about 40 minutes or so. Hugh will be sharing with us some of his knowledge and insights as well. And then for the final 20 minutes, Emily and Hugh will be sort of taking questions up here at the top, so there will be an opportunity for you to sort of pose any questions or make any observations that you might like to Hugh. It's actually Hugh drawing upon his vast experience as a clinical psychologist. And I'd like to say a few words about how we sort of ended up here, really. So, the law school here at Birmingham City University and in its previous incarnations is a very long-established law school and particularly heavily focused on practice and interdisciplinarity. That's really part of the raison d'etre of the law school here at the university. And a big part of what the law school is doing is sort of exploring the boundaries across different disciplines, as interdisciplinarity would suggest, but particularly through the centre that was set up a few years ago in sort of law, science, the Centre for Law, Science and Policy. That's the right way around, Sarah, isn't it? Yeah. The Law, Science and Policy, and Dr. Sarah Cooper, who's here, is our Director of Research in the law school as well, and has been instrumental in really sort of pushing the agenda of that area forward. But it's really in that area, sort of interdisciplinarity and exploring some of the ramifications of sort of law crashes up against other areas like science, and in this case like psychology as well, and sort of medical practice, that some really interesting insights are developed and emerge as well. And that's really where Hugh comes in. So Hugh has joined us as visiting professor in law and psychology. But Hugh brings vast expertise in this area, sort of medicine and law, drawing upon his expertise as a clinical psychologist to our understanding of sort of legal practice and legal theory and the law itself as we go forward. And hence, it's with that background that Hugh tonight brings this talk, The Power of Resilience in Challenging Times, drawing upon his years of expertise, both at his Harley Street clinic, but also in his work as an expert witness in numerous court cases and working with numerous witnesses over the last few decades in the UK and beyond, that he's going to draw upon tonight. So I'm delighted to welcome Hugh and Emily to be with us tonight as well, and thank you all as well for coming out this evening to listen to what I'm sure will be a fascinating talk. So I hope you'll join me in welcoming Professor Hugh Koch.
Thanks very much, Keith. Lots of thank yous to start with. All of those here that know me know that I'm very grateful for you coming from all parts, north, south, east and west, Bristol, Cheltenham, London, and with their passports, Bolton. Thank you so much for coming. It's been great to be here. I'd like to make just one comment about Keith and BCU. I've been here about 18 months now, and from the very start, BCU and the staff in the law school have sort of embraced the ideas that I'm interested in terms of the interface between psychology and law, and I'm very, very grateful to Keith for allowing me to be here. We had one visiting professor dinner to get us trained up, and Keith gave just a very inspirational talk about our responsibility of contributing to the faculty. And he was basically saying, look, great to have you here, great to give you the status, the opportunity, please make a contribution that is worthy of that. And it just really struck home as being something that, of course, people in our privileged position should do. So I hope I'm learning to try and do that. Resilience is a very interesting topic, very contemporary, even though it goes way back to Confucius in about 500 years BC. It's been around a lot as an idea in literature and so on. But I think these days, if you now listen in the media, in the news, not everybody, but a lot of people are talking about resilience, and people have all sorts of different ideas. I was talking outside to somebody who said, well, is it going to be about work? Is it going to be about work processes? Is it going to be about work leadership? Very much work-oriented. Keith mentioned the word, which I'm not going to mention again because it's a rude word, and higher education. We may cover those very, very tangentially. But I'd like to start with resilience is our inner mental strength. That's one type of definition, very catch-all phrase. And I'm going to be talking to you tonight about 10 components of resilience. It's only my ideas. I think they are correct, obviously, but there are lots of different views about resilience. Tonight you'll hear my views. And as a way of starting, I want to start by talking about what resilience isn't. What does it mean to not be resilient? There was a very influential psychologist, Martin Seligman, in the States, who, like many psychologists, did these rather wacky experiments. But I want to describe the experiment that he did, which was putting a small group of dogs into a metal cage. So just imagine, let's talk about this hive as a metal cage with 3-4 dogs sitting here and a door over there. And he applied, as psychologists do, the electrodes to the cage. Psychologists are very strange people. He applied the electrodes to the cage, and the cage electrified, and the dogs were shocked. They jumped up in the air and they raced out. Very appropriate, goal-oriented behavior. I want to get away from these shocks. I'm going to leave. He then closed the door, locked the door still there but locked, shocked the dogs jumped up in the air and raced to where the door, they'd learnt the door was, but they couldn't get out. Appropriate behaviour. They'd learnt there was a door, unfortunately it's locked, but I tried to get out, personifying these dogs. They then electrified again, but before they did that, I'm not sure you can say this, but they bricked the door in metallically. In other words, they took the door away. There's now no door there. Shot the dogs. The dogs raced for where they thought there was a door. Obviously, they found out there was no door. Quite appropriate, goal-oriented behaviour. After a while, though, they shot the dogs again, and the dogs just jumped up physiologically, but they didn't bother going there because they'd learnt appropriately, unfortunately, there is no ... I don't know whether dogs say that. No ... door. Again, appropriate behaviour. The interesting thing was the final stage of the experiment. Seligman put the door back in. They shocked the dogs jumped up physiologically and did nothing. They could escape. There was a door there now, but they didn't try to escape because they felt, again personifying the dogs, they felt there's no point trying to escape because there is no door there. And he used that to describe, if you like, experimentally, a concept of what's called learned helplessness. I've learnt there's no point, I can't sort this problem out. And learned hopelessness, I feel awful, I wish I could, but I can't. And in a way, he was using that as a paradigm for describing what it feels like to be distressed and to be depressed. So that is what not being resilient is about in one sense, and we're going to come back to that 2 or 3 times. But what I want to do is talk about 10 components, 9 or 10 components, time permitting, of this very fascinating, exciting idea of what resilience is. We all think we are resilient a little bit from our experiences. We all want to be more resilient. So these 10 factors are very important. The first, most obvious one, and in my occasional not sleeping, thinking about tonight moments, I thought, well, surely this is the most important one. And when you look at some of the literature, this really comes out that resilience is about bouncing back from setbacks. Now, whatever your model of life is, life as a human is about several types of stages by age. Young toddler, teenager, young adult, middle-aged adult, older adult, as an example. There are different ways of describing that. Within those stages are all sorts of life events, normal life events, learning to walk, learning to talk, going to school, going to secondary school, going to college, going to work, relationships, etc., through to death and dying. And before I remember, I just wanted to remember this bit of research, which is people don't talk about death and dying because it's slightly not terribly exciting, really, except it's something terribly normal that happens. 15% of people questioned about why don't they talk about death and dying is because they thought, if I do talk about death and dying, it'll make me ill. And as an example of illogical or alogical views, it's really quite a good one, although one totally understands the idea, the sentiment behind it. Not only life stages we've talked about, but also events. There are normal events. We leave jobs to go from one job to another, or we move on from one job to another, etc., etc. Normal positive events, we get married, etc. And adverse, what's called adverse events, things going wrong. Relationships breaking down, losing jobs, unemployment, financial problems, illness, etc. So there are all sorts of different events, and we have to swim through this life trying to learn how to deal with it. It was very interesting. I was working in Colchester with Francis at the back there many moons ago, and we were very interested in the community mental health service movement in this country and in the States. And in the States, they talked about, back in about 1970, something called stress inoculation models. And basically, to cut a long story short, what it meant was, going back to my life model of events, positive or otherwise, wouldn't it be sensible to try and educate or disseminate information about typically negative adverse events or even normal events, and try and help educate people before the events happen, because we know they're going to happen. We're not quite sure what event will happen or when it will happen, but we know things are going to happen in some shape or form. Would it not be sensible to teach and educate, especially younger people, because they're potentially more malleable and open to education, in terms of the event and how they might deal with it. Take an example, having a stable relationship, whether it's marriage, what sort of relationship. Having a stable relationship has certain examples, certain consequences. Could we teach younger people before they've moved into a stable relationship what it's going to be like? What it's going to be like to argue occasionally? What it's going to be like to think, well, do I say sorry before we go to sleep? What is it like to say, I think Joe Brand said that the way to a man's heart is through his top pocket, preferably with a very sharp knife. You know, so all these aspects of relationships, could we not teach people before they get into them? If you take parenting, none of us, I think, had any education in parenting, yet it's the most important job that we will ever have. Why not have a little bit of help here, apart from what our mum and dads tell us? It really didn't take off, and I think there's something probably quite odd about what this was suggesting. Because what it was suggesting is to be resilient, get ahead of the game, learn about events before they happen so that you can deal with them better. But in fact, it never took off, and it was something that we played around with professionally and had no success with it either, but is certainly something that is worth thinking about in trying to help us bounce back from setbacks. When any of these things are happening, it makes us feel things. And step number 2 is about how do we manage our distressing feelings. We all get, from time to time, hopefully not today, overwhelmed by our feelings. We get sad, we get angry, we get fed up, we get very anxious, or we get any or all of those a lot and feel overwhelmed. We have to learn as we get older, how do we manage that? The 3 or 4 most obvious ways to deal with them that you might say, well, this is what happens when you have therapy or when you read about self-help or however you access it, is number 1, some form of what's called anxiety management, relaxation, physical relaxation. How do we get this generalized anxiety to just wind down? Relaxing in the car to work, relaxing home from work is things that we all do that, and when you're very anxious you need to do that a lot, and it works temporarily or across time. Second area could well be problem solving and desensitization. When you have something like a fear of driving, a fear of flying, a fear of going to work, all sorts of fearful type, phobic type feelings where you want to gradually, bit by bit, get over it. And I suppose my experience as an expert witness is very much dealing with the car accident side of it and phobic drivers. Thirdly, the area of dealing with your thinking, clarifying your thoughts, so that your brain is just winding down, the cogs are winding down from racing so hard, which is what happens when you have things like obsessional compulsive feelings or parts of depression that make you feel that your thoughts are just racing and racing and racing. And lastly, most people, when they go to therapy or when they need help, they want social support. They want people around them to help them because of their anxieties about relationships or about their depression. So people trying to get over their problems from a resilient point of view need to access those sorts of helpful techniques. And one point maybe at the end, slightly politically, there's never ever going to be enough sufficient therapy resources for all the people that want that sort of help, because up to a point we all want aspects of this help from some time. When we go to see somebody, a friend or a therapist or a boss, what do we want from them? What as friends or bosses or relatives, what should we try and help when on offer when people come to see us? People want our optimism, they want our trust, our warmth, our genuine feeling that we want to help, our empathy, our sympathy. They want all these warm types of responses to help them work through whatever they may or may not, or we may or may not need to work through. They need our optimism, they need our what's called present-centeredness, not to be distracted, but to focus on their problems. And resilience in us and those around us is about managing those feelings and feeling that you have some capability to reduce the very distressing feelings that from time to time we have. Communication or talking to people is obviously one of our main selling points as humans. And to begin with, when we're very young, obviously we are starting out, we're very shy, we're dependent on our parents, we are to a certain extent quite helpless, and then we gradually through our teenage years learn to communicate more freely and more intentionally. There was a psychologist in Massachusetts called Alan Ivey who developed what he called a microskills model of communication. And basically he was just cutting communication into very, very micro chunks. And I was going to do a little role play here tonight, but I've decided not to do that because of time. I was advised not to do it because it would be difficult to manage, as role plays are. So anyway, I'm trying to do it myself. And I'd like you to think, what sort of behaviours am I showing? I'm the role player, role-playing, giving a talk, and giving a talk. What ordinary general communication skills can you see in this person here? And I'm sorry, I'm going to answer the question. You can hear me talking. You can see some level of animation. You can see me looking at most of you. I'm trying to scan most of you in this odd, wonderful environment. But I know I'm supposed to try and look at every one of you, and I'm doing that. In other words, in terms of general communication, when we talk to each other, you can see non-verbal, body posture, eye contact, and verbal talking, balanced talking, conversations, and so on. And most people have those skills. But one of the things I'm really interested in general and in this part of the talk is, resilience is about being inspirational, and it's about being enthusiastic. It's about being positive. All those high energy, with or without the assistance of drugs, type of approach. So, if I could, I'm now a little bit getting warmed up. I can see there is a tunnel. I'm not sure the light is on at the end, but I know there is a tunnel. I can see I can get through my talk, so I'm feeling a bit more happier, a bit more enthusiastic. But let's just ramp it up a little bit. Supposing Keith said, well, this is great. Because this is the first talk, we're going to give you £1,000 for doing this. And I could then think, okay, well, great, £1,000 in my pocket. What can I do about it? How are my skills changing? How's my behaviour changing? I haven't thought of doing this, and I'm just doing it. How I'm getting more animated now at this very kind gesture that we all heard Keith say. You can see my eyes are lighting up. I'm getting more animated. I'm using this hand more, which I wasn't before, apparently. In other words, you could, I don't want to do this to death, you could try and define, well, what does it mean? What does it mean to behave, to look and behave in an inspirational and enthusiastic way? And having tied that all down, how can we teach everybody in some shape or form without being stupid? I'm not being, God, language, you have to be so careful. I'm not being in a way that is being daft. I'm just trying to, I often teach groups, and I'm sure you teach, or I'm with groups, where in a slightly more smaller forum, you have some people that are inspirational and enthusiastic, and some people that are not. Some people look as if really they don't want to be there, but they've got to be there, they don't want to be there. You want, obviously, to work with people, and most people want also to be with people who are inspirational and enthusiastic. And the point of this is the microskills model allows very sensible conversations in educational, training, conversational circumstances where you can try and teach, role play, learn how to be inspirational and enthusiastic. Moving on from that, we could touch, and I feel sometimes touching on this subject, not touching per se, touching on this subject is very inadequate, but I want to touch on it and then move on. I wonder what, in my draft talk, I use the word deepening social skills, which is an awful phrase. What are the things that help stable relationships work better? And I came up with a few things that I'm sure there's 101 things, and I've just come up with half a dozen. Number one, showing affection to your partner. Number two, complimenting them on some aspect of their selves, their behaviour, what they did, what they cooked, what they offered you, cup of coffee, whatever. Just being grateful and showing some appreciation. Sharing values. The one I liked, the next one, glorifying the struggle. In other words, something has happened whereby you've come very close to blows. Never happens to me, I'm just talking about what people tell me. You come very close to blows and you get it sorted, and you can glorify the struggle when you've come out of it. You think, oh, thank goodness that's all over, we're now talking. But, you know, we've been through another subject that we can tot it up as experience, and we've learnt, and we both know what we feel about it. In other words, you glorify the struggle. You've had some sort of shared values. You are able to show, going back to the micro skills, the positive verbal, non-verbal skills when they leave for work, or when you leave for work, or when they come back from work, or you come back from work, or you meet up with them, that there is some expression of positivity between you rather than the absence of that. The fact that when something does go wrong, that you repair it, and you build up the evidence in your relationship that, okay, things do occasionally hit the fan, but we can repair the damage. We can repair the apparent damage. It's not damage. You can repair the experience. That conversations are, to a large extent, 50-50. In other words, you talk a bit, they talk a bit. You then talk a bit more, they talk a bit. Occasionally, one person will be more distressed, and they will just want to be listened to, not talked to or talked at. So, okay, that changes. So there are different rules. And lastly, before we move on, that it's okay to say sorry. And I came across a very interesting phrase that someone said in this topic, that even if you have an argument with somebody and only 10% in reality is your fault. Let's say that is true. Obviously, that would be my perception on that occasion, that it was only 10% my fault. If it's 10% your fault, you can say sorry, brackets, for that 10%. By implication, you're not saying sorry, it was all my fault, because actually 90% was your fault. But 10% was my fault. I probably needn't have said that or could have said something, so you can say sorry. All it takes is usually one person to say sorry, and things move on. So resilience inevitably is, we can talk about resilience, we are talking about resilience as individuals in relationships, or maybe in groups, and then we'll talk a bit later on about resilience in work. But resilience in individually and in relationships is about communication and about effective communication. And it's a truism to say that. I can hear, one or two people say, well, gosh, did I pay all this money to be told that? Of course we know that, but it is something that is a set of skills. And one of the things that in Alan Ivy's work, he uses this word intentional. And that is, okay, most of us, when we were out there having a little hors d'oeuvre before the main course, we weren't thinking, well, okay, I must try this, I must use these skills. We were just being automatic. But communication is also about being intentional. I am, to a certain extent, anxiety permitting, being intentional with what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing here. I hope it's going okay. I know what I'm doing. It's something I rehearsed, and I'm doing it. So I do actually, there's a little bit of me little bit of meta something up here that knows what I'm doing. And that is a very useful skill to have, to be intentional. And resilience requires you to be an intentional communicator. Right, next bit is the most exciting bit for me. That is about, part of being resilient is about knowing what you're thinking and structuring your thoughts in a positive way and defending yourself against negative, daft, not inappropriate, well, it could be inappropriate, daft, distorted thinking. A very influential aspect of psychology and therapy started off with Aaron Beck in Pennsylvania back in the 50s, 60s, then got, like a lot of things, came across the water to Oxford, people like John Teasdale, John Marzillier in Oxford, all centred on this model of what was called cognitive therapy. Cognitive just means thinking therapy, focusing on thinking. Prior to that, everybody was saying, when you get depressed, one thing that happens to you is you have negative thoughts. Pretty obvious. You feel awful and you have negative thoughts. And what we need to do is treat the feeling awful, possibly with drugs, and then the negative thoughts will go away. And that model makes some sense. But what Aaron Beck and John Teasdale's group found was actually, yes, that did happen. We know, talking to depressed people, that they have negative thoughts about themselves, about their world outside, and about their environment. But not only can we treat the underlying depression, we can actually focus on the thinking in itself. We can actually say, okay, let's talk about the way your thoughts are distorted, for want of a better word, and by changing your thoughts will be a feedback loop back into your mood and will cheer you up. So in other words, they were saying cognitive therapy doesn't have to just be done by a medical approach to the depression with antidepressants. It can be also very effectively done by let's focus on your thinking. So what did that actually mean? When you feel fed up, use that fairly ordinary word, difficult circumstance, you have what's called automatic negative thoughts. These are typified by words like, he always does that, she never does that, I ought to do that, I must do that, I mustn't make a mistake. The trouble with him is he always ... always jumps in with a solution, or he never jumps in with a solution. In other words, big dramatic words. I'm sure there's a better descriptive word, but they're dramatic words, they're big words. And especially the whole person one. Typically what we do, which runs us into awful problems in life, is we say the whole person is ... He is always late. Well, no one is always anything. The words are just not good predictors. They don't work. And of course, when you say to that person, trouble is, you're always late, well, that's going to go down like a lead balloon, because the person thinks, well, you know, I'm not always late. That's really unfair. So they really don't work at any level. A driver who has had a nasty accident and has avoided driving because of their motorway accident will come along and say, well, I'm not going to go back on the road because there's a 50% risk I'll have another accident. Well, what does that actually, a 50% risk, what does that mean? It means every other car is going to hit me, or every time I go out on the road, every second time I will have another accident. It is very illogical. Of course you understand they are totally frightened about having had one awful accident. The last thing they want is another one. But they exaggerate, understandably, the risk, and that then maintains their avoidance. Another person comes along and says, well, at work, I must be very careful. I mustn't make a mistake. They are very afraid of making a mistake. And they just feel work or home is potentially fraught with, I might make a mistake. And of course, you can't make a mistake. You can't make a mistake in this university because people are going to, get on your back. Of course, that model just cannot work. Anthony Ryle, a GP in Sussex, unfortunately died a couple of years ago, developed a model along these lines where he said what happens is people, they develop traps or snags or dilemmas, which were cognitive traps. I'll just, because of time, just mention one. The dilemma of if I shut up in myself, if I go into myself and I'm very quiet, I feel very, very depressed. But when I do open up, I tend to get a bit gobby and a bit over the top, and people reject me. So either ways, if I keep quiet, I feel fed up. And if I open up, people reject me. And those are the two options I've got. Well, clearly, if they think like that, their room to maneuver is quite limited. And where does, I've emphasized the negative side of our thinking. Where does that lead? Where do we go from there? Where is the positivity? So the action steps are, we have to look at the evidence for this idea that 50% of the time, if I go back in my car, I'm going to have an accident. Look at the evidence, dispute the accuracy, the validity of the evidence, look at alternatives, look at positive little steps moving forward, and trying to visualize ways forward. Working with people within a cognitive therapy framework is fascinating. It's fascinating to listen to the way people, all of us, tie ourselves up in knots cognitively, and therefore trying to undo the knot like a ball of wool. Visualization is an amazing skill that we can have to help us move forward and move away from a negative perception, a negative prediction, and try and think of, well, okay, I wonder what it would be like if I went in that car, maybe in a car park or maybe on a quiet road. Maybe I could do that very slowly with somebody, maybe on a Sunday evening. If I visualize it, a little bit anxious about it, but I think I could do it. Visualizing is an amazing thing to do. I visualize being here tonight many, many times in order to decide about content, decide about, was I going to be moving around? Was I going to be sitting down? Who was going to be here? Was it going to be full, empty, etc.? Visualizing is a way of managing the anxiety and rehearsing where you go. So part of resilience is very much about having positive thoughts that are rational and are borne out by evidence most of the time. None of these things are total, but most of the time. So that is step 4 of 10. Okay, I'm going to speed up slightly. Doesn't matter, be fine. Step 5. To manage all these steps and to manage our lives, we have to be organised. We have to organise our time and our paper. And I'm going to just jump straight to the jugular of this one. In your office, be honest, in your office, have you got a sheet of paper with the list of your jobs on it? Sort of. Okay, I got some nods. Is your desk, apart from that list, clear? If it's not clear, have you, presumably all you've got on is the next job that you need to do tomorrow? Because you're going to do one, even you, only you can do one job at a time. So there's no point having more than one job on your desk, is there? So all you need on your desk, Keith, as an example, is a sheet of, well, you've got a you probably got a bigger sheet than anybody else. It's a metaphor. A sheet of paper with a list of jobs that are in your mind that you want to try and do over the next week or so, and on the rest of the desk, because Keith's got a very large desk, you'll be impressed by is his next job, because that's what he's going to do tomorrow. It's fascinating, isn't it? Because none of our desks are really like that. And I don't know, are there any medical secretaries in the room? Probably not, so I can make one pejorative comment about medical secretaries. Go into their room, they've got all these patient files, thick files, mountains on their desk. They've got no room on their desk. I mean, they're literally typing like this. And on the floor, they've got, I mean, seriously, it's all over the place. They will tell you, I know exactly where Emily Koch's file is. They don't, but they feel as if they know. And it's operationally, you're like this, I'll talk about work now. Operationally, it just doesn't work. Because all you need tomorrow morning, I would suggest, is your list that you revise repeatedly, but one list and one job, because that's all you can do at a time. So that's sorted that. 7 was going to be clarity of is going to be clarity of mind. All this talking that we're doing, thinking that we're doing, talking to people outside socially, work-wise, is great. But we need focus, we need clarity of mind. And clarity of mind, whatever language you use, it's something that when people talk about mindfulness, when people talk about Zen Buddhism in a very ordinary, westernized way, it's about being present-centered and focusing on what you're doing now, focusing on that one job. To do that, you need to be present-centered. If you're thinking about, gosh, what I'm going to do over the next few weeks and months and my targets and so on, you're not going to get down and focus on that one job. Because to focus, you need to be present-centered, you need to concentrate, and you need to be not distracted, all of which we find difficult to do. When you do occasionally feel that you can be present-centered, what's that like? I mean, and let's try and tie it together a little bit to do with being in here. Being present-centered in here is observing how you feel. I don't know how comfortable those chairs are. They look reasonably comfortable. Observing what's going on inside your body and inside your head. It's being able to label what's going on inside your head. So, you know, if you've got an itch on your arm, or you're feeling cold, or you're wondering when's he going to stop, or could do with a drink of some sort, all these various things, to be able to label them, it's good to be able to label them. It's good to then be able to focus on one sensation at a time. If you've got all that going on, you don't quite know what you're feeling or thinking. But ideally, you want to say, yeah, I am a bit thirsty. I could do with some water. Or feeling a bit hot under the collar, whatever. Or, well, I wonder what the time is. It's being able to focus solely on identifying what that experience is. And fourthly, allowing yourself to do that and not criticizing yourself for any of those thoughts. Now, that is a Zen type of Zen mindful type of way of looking at the way you focus. And with all these things, it's very important, in order to be resilient about any and all of the things we've talked about, is to be able to focus. Gone through that really very quickly. Work, 1 to 7 we've done, and that's about individual, social type of stuff. Number 8 is about work. Nearing the end. Derek Mowbray, who's a world expert on work resilience, he would use those words, unfortunately he's not here today, has written a lot of the seminal stuff about how to be resilient in work. It's important to look at the individual, to look at the manager, the leader, to look at the overall organisational culture, and to really address all three aspects of that. Most organisations don't change unless it changes metaphorically at the top. You understand what I mean by that? The people who are supposedly the leaders saying this is what we want to do. And I don't know BCU very well, but the things that Keith was saying in his introduction, really very apposite. It's a very collaborative place. People at the top of BCU have clearly laid out their stall to be collaborative, interdisciplinary, welcoming, and very innovative for a lot of good reasons. And that really does come across to someone like an outsider like me coming in. In other words, the culture is important. One of my main customers is in the audience, and the culture at this very large firm that they represent is very much about collaboration, positivity, sorting problems out in an equanimical way, and getting the work done to everybody's benefit. And it's a great pleasure working with them. So that's the Derek Mowbray model of culture, and how important it is if someone, and I'm not being sycophantic, I'm using the opportunities I have here, to have someone who is at the head of the faculty here showing interest, showing support in the way he's doing, is what it's about. Many times I've worked in organisations and I've gone to the top guy and said, look, can you just come along and just introduce the topic? 5 minutes and then go. You don't have to stay. Just come and say, this is good, please listen. And a small number will do it, a majority are too busy because they're busy people. We know they're busy people, leaders, busy people. So, very inadequately, 4 other ways of looking at organisations, whether they're university organisations, business organisations, hospitals, primary care, law courts, law firms, is number 1, it's important to have a culture that people are trusted, that staff are empowered, whatever that means, are helped to feel good about being in this particular place, that they are smiled at when they come to work, that their names are known, their names are used, hopefully in a kind way. So in other words, the staff empowerment culture is crucial. Secondly, the customer-supplier language is understood. Again, the organisation I alluded to that I work a lot with, that are here tonight, we and them understand that every now and again we are supplying something. Every now and again we are the customer, we're asking for something. Every now and again there's various chains going on that if I do this, they need that, and of course they will react. So you need to be aware of this different customer-supplier chain system that occurs, because if you're not, you are not aware of it at your peril. And in order to give excellent customer service, you need to be able to understand that. Thirdly, it's important to have a continuously improving organisation. Whatever Keith said today, or whatever he said that time a year ago, if he was doing it again with another group, he probably would do it slightly differently, moving it on from wherever it was a year ago. In other words, you learn to improve the process of anything. It's called CQI, continuous process improvement, continuous looking at how to make things better. And lastly, something that may be relevant or interesting to some people who are in large organisations. Large organisations have different levels, and part of a resilient organisation is knowing how those different levels operate, because the people at that level operate differently to the people at that level. Shouldn't use top and bottom, that's pejorative, but I've got to use some model. I want to finish and nearly finish the whole thing a little bit briefly with a story about work and about quality. John Oakland, who is the professor of organisational psychology and quality up in Leeds, developed a lot of thinking in manufacturing industry about total quality management. Total applies to all the processes, quality, and managing the whole process. But the story that he tells in one of his training videos, which it was so fun, was he goes along to a hotel, reception desk here, and he says to the lady behind the reception, "Excuse me asking, but do you do typing? And I've got a letter I need urgently typing." And she said, "Well, yes, of course, Professor, I'll take it. Come back at 4 o'clock. So he comes back at 4 o'clock, and he says, "Oh, I've come for my typing. Could I have my letter, please?" She said, "Oh, yes, certainly, I've just done it." Picks it up, gives it to him, puts it on the table and just signs it and says, "Could you post it?" And she's horrified, and she said, "Well, aren't you going to check it?" He said, "Well, I know what I wrote." I said, as long as you could read my writing, which I think you probably could, you presumably checked your typing. I don't need to check your typing." And she was horrified because she hadn't checked her typing. And it's a fun example of we all need to do what our jobs are. I'm sorry, I must stop using you as an example, but you are the nearest to me. If you ask me to do something, you should only ask me once. I should go away, write it down, and remember to do it. And even though I'm busy, make sure I do it by whatever deadline you've given me. I shouldn't then have to say to Keith, "Oh, I've got a funny feeling you asked me to do something. Could you remind me about my jobs?" No. He's got enough work reminding himself about his jobs. He doesn't need to remind me about my job. So, work, 8, 9. Samurai swordsman. You've been waiting for this story, but I'm going to almost finish on this. Samurai swordsman. I don't know whether any of you are samurai swordsmen. I once had a client who collected samurai swords, but that's not the story. Apparently, to be a samurai swordsman, you have to learn that for about 3 months. So you come to work, and they give you a sword, and they say, "Okay, off you go." I don't know what the Japanese for that is. And you just do that for 3 months. Then when you've done that for 3 months, they say, "Okay, that's quite good. Now we want you to do that." Anyway, cut a long story short, they teach the samurai to do these strokes ad nauseam until they get it right, and then they let them loose on whatever samurai swordsmen do, and they're able to do that. In other words, they've integrated it. It's great fun doing this aerobic exercise. And in a way, I want to finish almost by saying there's no right or wrong about what I've been talking about tonight. They're abstractions. They're good ideas. They're backed up by research. Everything I've talked to you about, largely, I could back up with either research or good experience or clinical experience. But they're abstractions. If next time you give my talk, you would come up with 10 really good ideas about what you think resilience is. So there's no necessarily truth and beauty, but hopefully there's some informed idea about what I've been talking about. I want to finish with one story which I will remember, and let's hope I remember the quote, and then I'm finished. One story, I had a client in Exeter called John, who was a mechanic, young guy, 20-something. He was cycling along 5 miles an hour and overtaking some parked cars and got hit at 5 miles an hour by a car that didn't see him. And he had catastrophic injuries. He lost the use of his lower legs, lower part of his body. Upper part was okay, paraplegic below the waist. And he was bringing a claim, quite rightly, for the damage to his bike and the damage to his body and the damage, his lawyer thought, metaphorically, to his head. Catastrophic injuries, surely he must be depressed, very anxious, whatever. So my job as an expert witness psychologist was to assess, understandably, all his fallout, that you'd think, gosh, he must be feeling really, really crap. He came along, did he come along with his dad? No, I think he came along on his own, in his wheelchair access, came into my room, had a very interesting chat. I couldn't find anything psychologically wrong with him. Now, okay, we know people sometimes put a front on things, but I didn't feel he was putting a front on things. He was being very, very sensible. And he was basically saying, I'm not depressed, I'm not anxious. His father had bought him a little garage with loads of pulleys and things, and he had very good upper body strength. He worked out and so on, and he could take engines out of cars with these pulleys and his wheelchair. He had a girlfriend, had a stable relationship. I won't go into all the gory details, but he had a stable relationship and had a great time, very exciting time socially and so on. So basically he had developed, use my words carefully, whether he developed it or whether he had it in him already, he had resilience par excellence. And there are all sorts of different models for, well, what is resilience? But that guy, John, really had amazing resilience to be able to manage in such a catastrophic situation. Churchill said at one point, towards the end of the Second World War, success is not final, failure is not fatal, but it's the courage to continue to deal with adversity that is what resilience is about. And thank you very much for putting up with me.
So my name is Emily Koch. That name will ring a bell. I am Professor Koch's daughter. I'm also an author and journalist. I don't know which of those three qualifies me to be here. I think you may have had a word and got me the gig. Thank you. It's lovely to be here. I think we'll start by just saying, on behalf of everyone here, thank you for an informative talk. I think resilience isn't really something I'd thought about before you told me that this was the subject of your talk today. I thought a lot about what makes me happy, and that's my first question to you, really. Do you think we spend too much time worrying about what makes us happy when would we be better off trying to work at being more resilient, and would that get us better results with happiness?
I mean, in answering that, it's interesting the genesis of the title, because the original title you gave me was Forget Being Happy, It's Resilience That You're After. And again, that sort of clanged a little bit. And I wrote something in my talk notes that I didn't use thinking about this. And I think we want to feel happy tonight. We want to go home feeling happy tonight, feeling we've had a good time, whatever that means. So when we get home, someone may say, oh, did you go to the talk? Was it any good? Did you have a good time? And you want to be able to say some version of yes to that. And hopefully you want to keep having that type of experience where you do things and you say, oh, I enjoyed that. And maybe lots of those experiences. So I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with feeling I want to be happy lots of time. However, life is not just that bowl of cherries. However good we are, however strong we are, whatever word you want to use, life isn't always about being happy. Things do go wrong or happen or are unpredictable or uncertain. And I think the resilience model comes in there, that we need skills to manage, increased ill health, or certain types of ill health, or a financial problem. You're not going to wake up and think, oh, great, I got a financial problem today. You're going to think, oh, ... but then how am I going to deal with it? How am I going to sort that out? So the little note I had in my talk was something like, yes, let's feel happy today and hopefully happy tomorrow, but alongside that, have resilient skills to do with predicting setbacks, predicting things that, don't really want to happen, but they're going to happen. And the two go together, not one or the other.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes. It sounds like I know you've had a successful career, but has failure played a part? Talking about resilience and bouncing back, has failure played a part in getting you to where you are today, do you think?
The biggest failure that I've had, not the only failure, the biggest failure was when I was doing my NHS general management stuff, I was on a general management track. I'd been lucky enough to have one job that worked really well and made me and the family think, oh, you could go like that a bit. Let's go for the next job up. I went for the next job up and got it, and it really did not work. There was nothing about it that worked. I was, I think, promoted to my level of incompetence. In other words, there were things about me that didn't work, things about the environment that didn't work. It's a very, very stressful circumstance in general medicine as opposed to psychiatry, etc. Anyway, so in my view, I failed, and I had to then move on rapidly to, with respect, replace the salary, replace a work role, and so on. Now, looking back, I just felt I had to do it. I mean, with respect, you were a lot younger. I had a large financial commitment that there was no way out of it. I was stuck in a financial commitment. I had to replace that, pretty sharpish. So a little bit of me just felt, well, I've just got to get out of bed and do it. And luckily, my adaptable skills I had that could be adapted to different sort of areas were alive and well, and I was able to sort it out. Now, looking back, I really don't, it'd be neat to say, oh yes, that failure really spurred me on. I'm not sure that was the case. I could have done without the failure. It was bloody hard work and very distressing. It ended up absolutely fine, because what I've done since, I don't think I would have done had that not occurred. Now, you don't know, but I just don't think I just got into an area that was different because I had to do it. So, I don't make a lot of psychological sense other than a little bit of me work-wise is reasonably resilient. I'm not resilient across the board, but work-wise maybe I am a bit, and that helped a great deal. I sometimes say to myself, I'm too old for this to happen, but I sometimes, the last few years, said, oh, I wonder what would happen if this happened again. Supposing this organisation in the audience stopped giving me any work and, my business went down the chute. What would I do? I don't really want to. I don't really want to find that out, and it's not going to happen in my lifetime. But I like to think I would do something different. I'd do something resilient in some other way. If it happened now, I'd have less financial commitments, so it'd be easier, etc., etc. So that's a sort of garbled response, yes and no.
I think we are coming to the end of our time here. So just quickly before we wrap things up, out of those 9 points I think we had in the end, which, if we're all going to take one thing away from today to work on, which of those points is the most important or useful?
The 2 points.
One.
The 2 points would be the cognitive thinking clarity and non-distorted aspect of the way that we think. That's not too obtuse a sentence. And within a social context where we spend our time with people at home and at work or socially that we like, that we love, that we value, that make us feel good, and is a feedback loop to make us want to understand how to use the logicality that we talked about. So it's, in psychologist speak, it's a social cognitive model: social, relationship, communication, cognitive thinking, clarity of thought. I mean, that covers about 6 of the things I talked.
I was going to say that's cheating, but we'll allow you. Thank you very much. I'm sure you'd all like to join me in thanking Professor Koch for this evening. Thank you all for being here. Thank you.
Thank you. Well done. That's good. Okay.
Hugh, Emily, can I just on behalf of the university thank you very much as well. I mean, developing and sharing knowledge is exactly what university is about. So you fulfilled the brief from the dinner last year, Hugh. Well done. We look forward to more. Thanks very much for sharing it. And thank you all very much for coming along tonight and participating in this event. And safe journey home to you all. Hugh, thanks again.